Hey you, welcome to my channel, A Year and a Day. My name is Jenny and this is a VR to the hashtag Tarot to the Extreme, which was started by Marlene Theresa. I will leave a link to her channel down below. Now, confession time. This is actually the third time I'm trying to record this video. Usually I record everything separately. I do the video part, then I try to think about what I'm trying to say, then I try to write down my thoughts and structure the story I want to tell, and then lastly I do the voiceover. This time I'm trying to do everything at once. And it's a bit different than what I'm used to. It's also just difficult because I'm an introvert, I'm a perfectionist. I want everything to be useful, what I say. I don't want to word vomit on the internet and bore you to death with whatever. So I'm overthinking it way too much. It was making it way too complicated. So here I am, I'm trying again. I have a nice cup of orange and ginger tea. So let's dive into the hashtag. I have included, by the way, both Oracle and Tarot decks, so I have just looked at the whole of my collection. The first prompt is Minimalist versus Maximalist. Now, I do not have a lot of minimalistic decks in my collection, but the one that did come to mind was the Hollow Valley deck of symbols. This is a beautiful deck with a very simplistic, calm art style. It's all in black and white. I really like the hand lettering kind of font that was used. And every illustration consists of several individual symbols. And the guidebook that comes with it gives a really clear breakdown of what you see in the illustrations. I really love this deck. You can pair it very easily with a lot of other decks. And the messages are very clear and the guidebook is very interesting. And I really love the art style. So that was my pick for the most minimalistic deck within my collection. The most maximalist deck within my collection is the Kawaii Tarot. If you know this deck, it doesn't need a lot of explanation. Every card is very richly illustrated. The colors are very happy and vibrant. And a lot is happening on each card. And it's almost like this deck contains more than just illustrations. When I go through these cards, it's almost like I can hear music and see movement. This is a deck that really comes to life in my mind very easily. So it's very busy and very chaotic and very hysterical, but all in a very good way. So that was the deck I chose for most maximalistic deck within my collection. On to the second prompt, which is daytime versus nighttime. Let's start with nighttime. So I picked the Divine Feminine Tarot by think it's pretty clear why. This deck almost feels like it is set in outer space. The backgrounds are black, but you can also see the stars and planets. So this is a deck that is covered in darkness, but it doesn't feel like a dark deck. And that is because of all the golden, warm tones that are being used for the illustrations. And I recently backed a Kickstarter by Cocorina for the Soul Tarot, which would have been perfect for the daytime deck within this VR, because it's all centered around the sun. But that deck hasn't come in yet. So yeah, this is the deck I chose for the nighttime deck within my collection, the Divine Feminine Tarot by Cocorina. For the daytime deck, I chose the Golden Art Nouveau Tarot. So I think it's pretty clear why I chose this deck for my daytime deck. The whole deck is covered with gold foil. So it literally shimmers. For the magpies amongst us, this is a very tempting deck. But as you can see, even the darker themed cards really light up because of that gold foil. And remind me of the sun, I guess. So this is the deck that came to mind when I thought of a daytime tarot deck within my collection. It's the Golden Art Nouveau. The third prompt is the best shuffle versus worst shuffle. For the best shuffle, I have picked my very wonky edition of the Terra Volatile Tarot. This is a version of the Terra Volatile which has linen cardstock. I have actually two editions of the Terra Volatile. I call this my wonky version because there are some printing errors in it. And the tug box is also really wonky. This version was actually replaced by the creators with an upgraded version, which was much more like a collector's edition. That very thick cardstock and a hardcover two-part box. And even though that edition is absolutely gorgeous, it shuffles not so well because of the very thick cardstock. So it really feels much more like a collector's edition. Whereas this edition has linen cardstock. And it shuffles like a dream. I usually am an overhand shuffler, but this is one of the few decks within my collection that I happily riffle shuffle. And I can actually spend a lot of time just sitting, watching something on YouTube and just playing around with this deck, shuffling it. It's a very calming thing. So that's the best shuffle within my collection. It's the Terra Volatile Linen Edition. For the worst shuffle, I have actually picked two decks with two different cardstocks. Let's start with the Children of Litha. Children of Litha is one of my favorite decks within my collection. I absolutely adore the art style and I love the colors. If it weren't for the cardstock, which is rose petal, I think I would use this deck so much more. But the rose petal finish on this deck is the sticky kind. So you might see that with overhand shuffling, you get this big clumps of cards. It really takes me out of the moment of shuffling. And shuffling is actually a pretty important part of my tarot practice. It's a moment where I just take a breath, think about what I'm working on in that moment, what questions I have. And with this kind of cardstock, I am too distracted by the act of the shuffling itself. And it's such a shame because, like I said, this is one of the favorite decks in my collection when it comes down to the artwork. So one of the worst shuffles, unfortunately, is the Children of Litha. The second one I chose for worst shuffle is the Tarot of Mystical Moments. This is another one of my favorites when it comes to the art style. I am not particularly a fan of collage style decks, but somehow with this one it just works for me. I also really love the interpretations of the tarot meanings. And even though the guidebook is pretty straightforward and simple, it gave fun insight into the interpretations. So again, this is a deck I would use a lot more if it wasn't for the cardstock. And in this case, the cardstock is very slippery. But on top of that, the cards are also pretty large. So they are bigger than standard size. This is a Lo Scarabeo card from the Golden Art Nouveau. And as you can see, the Tarot of Mystical Moments is quite a bit bigger. So again, as an overhand shuffler, I have to be very, very aware of the shuffling, because otherwise cards will be flying all over the place. So I have to be really careful. And that really takes me out of that moment of shuffling and that process that's so important for my practice. It also just really annoys me, which is also not a very good energy to bring into a reading. Again, this is one of my favorite decks within my collection. And if it had different cardstock, even if it wasn't so slippery, I would use it a lot more. But the combination of it being and slippery cardstock and bigger cards, it's difficult to handle. So another worst shuffle within my collection, the Tarot of Mystical Moments. Next up is Confronting versus Comforting. So I think every tarot deck can be confronting, right? Tarot represents all aspects of life. So no matter what tarot deck you use, it can call you out and it can confront you with maybe things you do not want to hear or that are a little bit more difficult. But there are certainly tarot decks within my collection that I find even more confronting than any other tarot deck. And often that has to do with the art style, the colors and the depictions. So for this prompt, I chose the Outgrow Yourself Tarot and Oracle deck as one of the most confronting decks within my collection. And I think it's a combination of the colors being used and the art style. The black backgrounds combined with the bright colors have a little bit of a more aggressive sense to me. And the creatures depicted I have called my little garden demons in the past, because they don't feel human to me. They feel like mischievous creatures that live out in my garden and in my garden shed and reap havoc among the plants and everything. So the art style alone brings this sense of confrontation to me. Not in a bad way, but that's the emotion that it evokes when I flip through these cards. The messages are also pretty direct. This is definitely a deck I use when I want a very clear message, when I want to be called out on my shit, where I don't need sugarcoating, where I just want very straight up conversation with the cards. A little bit of tough love, I guess. So that's one of the most confronting decks within my collection. It's the Outgrow Yourself Tarot and Oracle. For the most comforting deck, I went to Oracle, because on moments where I need comfort, I do not necessarily go to the tarot. Like I said, tarot represents every aspect of life, and sometimes I don't need to deep dive into my issues. Sometimes I know what the issues are and I just need some support. And Oracle is a really good way to get a little support without it being too confronting. So I chose the Secrets of the Mystic Grove Oracle. For me, the art style of decks evokes certain emotions and associations. And the comfort that I associate with this deck starts with the art style. It's the soft watercolor artwork combined with the bright yet soft colors. So there's a certain harmony in this, a certain balance. It's colorful and busy, and at the same time it calms me down. This is also a deck that is very easy to use. When I have a busy day or a bad day and I don't have much time, but I just need that bit of support, and I pull out this deck, the messages are very clear. You get several keywords. That's basically enough as it is. But what I do like about this deck, that if you do want to dive in a bit deeper, the guidebook contains a little bit of a message, but also journal prompts, which are a few questions that you can use to either journal or to give some thought during the day. So this is a deck that feels very supportive to me and that I have used when I'm in need of some support. So this is the deck I chose for one of my most comforting decks within my collection, and it's the Secrets of the Mystic Grove Oracle. On to the next prompt, which is every day versus every so often. Now, I cannot say that I really use tarot every single day, but if I were to use it every single day, the Self-Love Tarot would definitely be a deck I could use. This deck is quite new in my collection. I have it a few months or so, but it's an instant favorite. The use of colors within this deck make me so happy. I love the combination of warm and cool tones. And again, it gives me a real sense of harmony and balance. Again, it's a tarot deck. It represents all aspects of life, but it does it in a very loving and warm way. Even with the more hard-hitting cards, The whole vibe and feeling of the deck is still very loving. And as the name suggests, the whole theme of the deck is self-love. So the guidebook that comes with it is also called the Positive Energy Guide. The messages that are included revolve around that whole concept. And I think that would be a very supporting and good thing to include in day-to-day practice with the tarot. So for my everyday tarot, I choose the Self-Love Tarot. For the every so often, I use a deck that is very special to me. And that is the Wildwood Tarot. This tarot does its own thing. The artwork by Will Worthington feels very earthy, very pagan. And this is a deck that really makes me feel connected to a whole different way of life, a way of life that we do not have anymore nowadays, but that's very important to try to stay connected to. The reason why I do not use this deck very often is that I feel it is best used for big moments in my life. When I have very big life questions, or when I'm evaluating a year or looking ahead at a year. Those are the moments where I pick up my Wildwood Tarot and ask the real big important questions. And the reason is that those were the kinds of questions that I asked when I just got this tarot. And the answers I got were so on point, they were so significant, and they felt so true and big that I just immediately decided this is not a deck that I will ask mundane questions to. This is a deck that is for the big stuff in my life. So for the every so often deck within my collection, I chose the Wildwood Tarot. The next one is overrated versus underrated. Now, it's not a very nice thing to say that something is overrated. So let's just say that the deck I'm going to show now is a deck that is very well known within the tarot community and that played a very important role. And that's the Wild Unknown. But with all that being said, this is a tarot that doesn't resonate with me at all. I included it in a VR I did months ago, which was the This or That VR to Lisa Papez. And basically I decided to rehome this deck, which I'm still planning to do. The reason is that I do not vibe with this art style at all. I knew it before I got it, but I got it anyway because it's such a well-known deck. I wanted to know what I was missing, if maybe something was there that I didn't get or pick up on when I looked at pictures online. But having it in my hands, I am sad to say I still don't get it. I have a lot of Blair Witch Project associations with all the sticks and kind of witchy branches. So instantly this deck has kind of this creepy feel to me. I also know a lot of people call this an intuitive reader or a good deck for beginners, but for me it just makes hardly any sense. If that all wasn't enough, there's also the little fact that I feel like this deck really hates me. I did a few readings when I just got it in, and every single reading I did was just nothing but doom and gloom. And the reason why I actually still have this deck is because I had this idea to test that out. What would happen if I would ask a question to the Self-Love Tarot, for example, and then ask the exact same question to the Wild Unknown? Could I prove that this deck hates me in that way? It seemed like a good experiment. But in the end, I think I'm way too superstitious to mess around with stuff like that. So, even though I still have it, I feel like I should really let this deck go. Because it's just not for me. And that's the Wild Unknown Tarot. For the most underrated tarot, I chose the Arcus Arcanum Tarot. This is a tarot deck that was created in 1986 by a comic book illustrator. This is actually a vintage out-of-print deck, which might also be a reason why I don't see it a lot here on TarotTube. I actually have 2 copies. One I keep safely in this box, and the other one I got as part of some tarot package you can still get on second-hand websites. And this is actually a German edition of the deck that I trimmed. And this deck reminds me of the comic books I read as a child. So in that way it has a very nostalgic feel for me. Even though the minor arcana can be pretty pippish, I feel like it's a very fun deck to do readings with. But again, I think it's a lot of nostalgia for me. But it was the deck that came to mind when we talk about underrated decks. Because I never really see it around and it has a special meaning for me. So that's the deck I chose for most underrated. It's the Arcus Arcanum Tarot. And then we have arrived at the very last prompt, which is light work versus shadow work. I think these are terms that you can interpret in many different ways. The way I interpret these terms is that for light work, I would use a deck that evokes happy emotions. It's still a tarot, it still covers all aspects of life, but because of the art style, because of the colors, because of the theme, it evokes happy emotions. So whatever message you get, it's made a little bit softer and a little bit kinder by the art style. Whereas shadow work is much more about really diving deep and seeking out an art style or a certain deck that really evokes those emotions that come with that. So with that said, for the light work, I chose the Way of the Panda Tarot, and this is the mini version. Now, apart from the fact that this is the mini version and the size makes it even cuter, the art style obviously also really helps. We have these white backgrounds, which makes it very bright, and then the colorful watercolor style illustrations. And of course, the pandas. This is just a really cute and happy deck that really evokes that lightheartedness that I would associate with light work. So for light work I chose the Way of the Panda Tarot. For shadow work I actually picked an oracle, and it's the Reclaim. I think this deck is pretty well known within the tarot community, and it's often described as pretty hard-hitting. But again, hard-hitting in a good way. For me, the Reclaim Oracle is an oracle of emotions. Every single card depicts the keyword so perfectly and so creatively. The art style is not very complicated, but it's very, very clever. And I think Marion Constantine, who created this deck, did an absolutely brilliant job at portraying all these different emotions. This is not a deck I just grab on any random day. This is a deck that I use when I have certain big questions or emotions that I want to analyze. What I really admire about this deck is that it doesn't sugarcoat anything. There is no toxic positivity in this deck. And yet it is brought in such a loving way. Even the dark, ugly emotions that every human has is portrayed in such a way that it makes you feel okay to acknowledge those feelings, and it makes you feel less alone, because you know, if there is even one person out there who can depict that emotion so very well, you are not alone in that feeling, and it's okay to feel that way. And it's also okay to not be okay with feeling that way and trying to work through it, trying to understand it, trying to release it. And that is something the Reclaim Oracle really has helped me with a lot. So I have nothing but love for this deck, and even though it's a hard-hitting deck, it's in the best way the perfect deck for shadow work, and that's the Reclaim Oracle. And that's it. That was the hashtag Tarot to the Extreme. Thank you, Marlene, for creating this hashtag. It was a lot of fun going through my collection. I hope this video was even a tiny bit enjoyable. I promise to try and practice making more videos like this in the future. Feel free to like or subscribe, or let me know in the comments what your choices would be. And I hope to see you next time. Bye!